Today we're here to talk about the Incas, all right? We talked about the Mayans, we talked about the Aztecs, we talked about how the Mayans influenced the Aztecs. Okay, now we're going to talk about the Incas. Now, while I'm talking about the Mayans and the Aztecs, I want you just to pay attention to the location, okay? The Incas had a little bit of distance between them and the Aztecs and the Mayans, okay? So look at the Aztecs and Mayans up here in North America. Incans are down here in South America. All right, there are mountains here. You can't tell that on this map because it's not a physical map. But there are mountains here, so we're not really sure how much they shared ideas, okay? Because they were actually separated a bit. So, economy. Incans, as you probably know, or probably can tell from the picture, they used irrigation. That's where they use ditches, canals, and sprinklers to supply their crops with water. But they did something actually cooler. So, watch this. Bam, terrace farming. Isn't that awesome? So the Incans lived on mountains and they adapted to living on mountains by figuring out how to farm and produce food on mountains. Okay, so they created steps or terraces and they practiced terrace farming. That's what this is called. So cool. Government. All right. Not only were they ruled by kings, but they had an empire. An empire is when you go beyond your own borders and ruling your own kingdom to actually ruling others too. All right. And the Incans were very good at this. They had a system for ruling different kingdoms that they would take over and expand. Their empire stretched 3,000 miles. We'll talk about that too. Religion. Okay. So just like the Aztecs and Mayans, they worshipped many gods. But one difference is that they were also interested in ancestor worship. Okay. So you may have heard of mummies from ancient Egypt, right? Well, the Incans also made mummies out of their kings that had died, okay? And they worshipped them. They thought that they were almost like gods or messengers between the living and the gods, okay? So it's actually, you can see one similarity and one difference between Mayans and Aztecs and the Incas. I want to draw your attention to this. This down here is a piece of the Temple of the Sun, a great Incan temple that the Spanish unfortunately destroyed and built their church on top of. Okay, this is a Spanish church. This is the remains of an old Incan temple. Now, I wish we could see it in its glory days because the Incan Temple of the Sun used to have a courtyard, a gold and silver courtyard filled with jewels where they actually had a whole garden made of gold. Like they were like babies and plants and animals all made of gold. It must have been amazing. The walls were actually lined with solid slabs of gold. Okay, the Spanish melted it all down, sent it all off to Spain to make themselves rich. Architecture, remember, that's the building styles. Okay, they built stone cities like the others. And look at this. The Spanish said that when they got there, the Incan stones were so well put together, the cities, that they couldn't even fit their swords in between the stones. They were just so perfectly carved together, okay? This is the city of Machu Picchu, one of the famous stone cities that was built by the Incans, okay? Oh, by the way, with their architecture, with these stones fitting together so solid, their buildings were very sturdy, okay? So when the Spanish took down the rest of the temple and built their church on top of it, the Spanish church has been destroyed several times by earthquakes, okay? Not so the Incan temple. It's solid as a rock. It's sturdy. All right, let's go on to other stuff. So these are things about the Incans that don't really fit into the easy boxes of religion, government, and architecture, things like that, but still very important. So we said that they had 3,000 miles of an empire. So they had to communicate somehow, and they had to control their empire somehow. So they built a road system, 3,000 miles of roads, okay? And they had runners at different stations that would send messages. They had a road along the ocean here, and a road along the mountains here, and roads that connected the two. Really amazing, all right? Now, the Incans didn't have a writing system, so how did they keep track of ruling an entire empire? Well, they did it with this thing called quipu, okay? It was a series of strings with knots, and depending on where the knots and the strings were, it would mean different things, okay? So that's how they would send signals. You can see that there's different knots here, and the different placement means different numbers, okay? So they could keep track of, okay, how many people in this village paid their taxes, right? How much taxes they paid. They could keep track of those numbers, okay, with quipu, okay? So pretty amazing. It's pretty unique. Most people had some sort of writing system. They used quipu to serve that purpose. Now, the conquest of the Inca, how were they defeated? So Atahualpa, the Incan emperor, was captured and killed by Francisco Pizarro. He had just finished a battle with his brother, which he won. His brother tried to take the empire from him, but he beat him. And so when about 187 Spanish showed up, challenging him. He wasn't very scared. He said, "Okay, I'll meet you. I have 50,000 Incan warriors in my army. You have about 180 people. I'm not very scared. So let's meet and let's talk this out." So they met in a big field, okay? Atahualpa was so confident, he didn't even bring his soldiers, right? He showed up and he had 4,000 people behind him. That was his crew, but they didn't have weapons either. They were just there in like their fine feathers and stuff. No weapons, all right? Well, the Spanish said, "Okay, we'll meet." They're standing in the field. Atahualpa walks up and they ambushed him. The horses came from the sides and came and attacked Atahualpa. They massacred all of the Incas, about 4,000 of them, and they captured and kidnapped Atahualpa. They said, "Atahualpa, if you give us one room of gold and two rooms of silver, we'll let you go." Atahualpa did that. A lot of that gold came from the Temple of the Sun, unfortunately, and the Spanish still killed him anyways. Okay, so when we look at how did Pizarro beat the mighty Incas, well, disease affected them hugely, just like it did the Aztecs. The weapons, okay, the Spanish had better weapons, okay, and armor than the Incans did, so that was one advantage they had. And surprise, kidnapping Atahualpa and killing him sent the whole empire into turmoil, okay? It was a shock, all right? One of the major effects of the Spanish coming and making contact with the Incas and the Aztecs and all those Native Americans is something we call the Columbian Exchange. Now, Columbian's named after Christopher Columbus because, right, he was one of the first to come from Europe to the Americas. And all these crops that we see on this side of this map were never before seen in North America. So Native Americans never had cattle, chickens, coffee, horses, onions, rice, sugarcane, any of those things before the Spanish brought them. Now, the Spanish also encountered things that they had never seen before, okay? Tobacco, tomatoes, peanuts, corn, beans, turkeys. Those are things that the Spanish, the Africans, and the Asians had never seen before. But that was part of the exchange, right? Of these new items, new foods, new animals that they were now, that both groups now had access to, okay? This one is a little better graphic, okay, of the Columbian Exchange because it includes a very significant piece that other graphic didn't include, okay, and that's disease. All right, disease had a huge impact on the Native Americans. In some places, 9 out of 10 Native Americans died when they came in contact with Spanish diseases. Okay, if your class was a Native American tribe and you were contacted by the Spanish and they brought their diseases with you, then there's a good chance that only 3 of you would survive. Okay? That's how devastating these diseases were to the Native Americans. Millions died. Millions. All right? Another big effect of this interaction was the encomienda system. Okay? It was a brutal system that the Spanish used to rule the New World. So they came, they got all the gold and silver, and they said, "You know what? I still want more money." So what do? They worked the Native Americans like slaves, okay, so that they could take the work that they did, the crops that they grew, the things that they made, the sugar that they made, and then go sell it and make themselves rich. Okay, the Spanish basically owned the land and the people on it. And we can see from this picture about how they treated folks who didn't agree to the work. Okay, chopping off hands. They're making them drink something. I think they made them drink like molten metal, like hot metal, liquid metal. Okay, very, very cruel system, the encomienda system, where the Spanish not only owned the land, they owned the people on it. Okay, it's been a little brutal. All right, so I want you to finish your worksheet, and after you finish that, I want you to start thinking about comparing and contrasting the Incas and the Aztecs. Okay, those were both contacted by the Spanish, right? The Spanish defeated them both, but there are big differences between the Incans and the Aztecs. Okay, so start thinking about those differences in religion, in government, all right, and architecture. Okay, and we will get back. I will be back with you next week. Okay, probably not in video form, but back with you next week. All right, good luck.